I found out my son was living a double life, and I never saw it coming. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I always thought I knew my son. I raised him, loved him, and did everything I could to be the best mom possible. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the day I found out he was living a double life. One night, I got a call that made my stomach drop. It was from an unknown number, and when I answered, a woman's voice simply said, "You need to come get your son. Now." I didn't recognize the voice, but something in her tone made my heart start racing. I demanded to know what was going on, but she just gave me an address and hung up. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I knew one thing. This wasn't going to be good. I grabbed my keys and left the house so fast I barely had time to think. My hands were shaking as I plugged the address into my phone. It was in a part of town I never went to, a place I had no reason to be. The drive felt like it took forever, even though it was only 15 minutes. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he in trouble? Was he hurt? Had he been arrested? None of it made sense. My son, Jake, was a good kid. Or at least I thought he was. He had always been responsible, polite, and focused on school. He wasn't the type to get caught up in anything dangerous. But then again, I was on my way to pick him up from some random place I'd never even heard of, after getting a cryptic phone call from a complete stranger. That wasn't normal. When I finally pulled up to the address, my stomach twisted. It was a rundown house with peeling paint, overgrown grass, and a group of guys standing out front smoking. They all turned to look at me as I got out of the car. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. I scanned the faces, looking for Jake, but he wasn't there. Before I could say anything, the front door swung open and a woman stepped outside. She looked about my age, but her face was tired, like she'd been carrying too much weight on her shoulders for too long. She crossed her arms and eyed me carefully before saying, "You're Jake's mom?" I nodded. "Where is he? What's going on?" She sighed and motioned for me to follow her inside. I hesitated for half a second before stepping in. The place smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke, and there were empty bottles on the coffee table. It was the kind of house that made my skin crawl. Then I saw him, my son, sitting on a torn-up couch, head in his hands. His hoodie was pulled up, and he looked exhausted. When he saw me, his face turned pale. "Mom," he whispered, like he'd just seen a ghost. I wanted to yell. I wanted to demand answers, but I kept my voice steady. "Get up, we're leaving." The woman who had called me folded her arms. "He's not in trouble, if that's what you're thinking. But you need to talk to him. Really talk to him." Jake didn't argue. He stood up, keeping his head down, and walked past me toward the door. I followed him out, back to the car, barely able to process what was happening. The entire drive home, he didn't say a word. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever excuse he had, because deep down, I knew, whatever this was, it was bigger than I could have ever imagined. The silence in the car was suffocating. I kept glancing at Jake, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just stared out the window like he wished he could disappear. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what I had just walked into. That house, those people, the way that woman had looked at me like I was missing something obvious. None of it made sense. Finally, as we turned onto our street, I broke the silence. "Jake, I need to know what's going on." He let out a slow breath but didn't look at me. "It's complicated." I gripped the wheel tighter. Complicated how? Because from where I'm sitting, I just picked my son up from a house full of strangers in the middle of the night, and I have no idea why. Jake exhaled sharply and ran a hand through his hair. "I was just helping someone out. It's not a big deal." I scoffed. "Not a big deal? You were sitting in a house that smelled like a frat party gone wrong, looking like you hadn't slept in days. And some woman I don't even know is telling me I need to really talk to you. So yeah, Jake, I think it is a big deal." We pulled into the driveway, and he immediately reached for the door handle, but I locked the car before he could get out. "No," I said firmly, "you're not walking away from this." For the first time since I picked him up, he turned to look at me, and what I saw in his face made my stomach drop. He looked guilty, like he was carrying something so heavy he didn't know how to put it into words. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he muttered. "Find out what?" I asked, my voice softer now. He hesitated for a long time before finally saying, "I've been living a different life, and I don't know how to tell you about it." A chill ran down my spine. "Jake, What are you talking about? He swallowed hard. You think you know me, Mom, but you don't. Not really. My breath caught in my throat. I had always prided myself on being close with Jake. I thought we had the kind of relationship where he could tell me anything, but sitting there, staring at him in the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I realized I might not know my son at all, and that terrified me. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, heart pounding in my chest. Jake, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my insides were anything but, I need you to explain what you mean by that. Right now. He sighed heavily, rubbing his face like he was trying to wake himself up from a bad dream. I didn't plan for you to find out this way, he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. I was gonna tell you eventually, but I didn't know how, and now it just looks bad. I scoffed, shaking my head. It doesn't just look bad, Jake. It is bad. You disappear, don't answer my calls, and when I finally find you, it's in some rundown house with people I've never met. And you think I wouldn't be worried? He clenched his jaw and looked away, staring at his lap. I didn't want you to worry. That's not how this works, Jake. I'm your mother. Worrying about you is my job. But you shut me out. And now you're sitting here telling me I don't know you? What does that even mean? He let out a shaky breath, finally meeting my eyes. It means I've been doing things you wouldn't approve of. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, filling in the blanks with every worst-case scenario imaginable. Drugs, gangs, some kind of illegal activity. My son, my sweet, goofy, once honest boy. What had he gotten himself into? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I don't care what it is, Jake. I just need you to tell me the truth. He bit his lip, hesitating. I've been making money in a way that you wouldn't like. My stomach twisted. Jake, be specific. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I've been betting, gambling. My eyes widened. Gambling? How? Where? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. Online, mostly, but also through people. I met some guys. They had connections. It started small, just stupid bets, but then I started winning, and then I started losing. My breath hitched. How much, Jake? He swallowed hard. Enough that I had to borrow, and when I couldn't pay it back fast enough, they came looking for me. My stomach dropped. Oh my God. My worst fears hadn't even come close to this. He wasn't just gambling, he was in debt to dangerous people. I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Jake, this is serious. Do you even realize? I know, Mom, he interrupted, his voice cracking. I screwed up, bad, and I didn't know how to fix it. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. That house? That wasn't just some random place. It was a safe house, a place to lay low. My blood ran cold. Lay low? Jake, what did you do? His expression turned haunted. It's not what I did, it's what they think I did. My heart pounded in my ears. My son was in serious trouble, and I had no idea how to save him. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. My son, my baby, was sitting next to me, telling me he was on the run from people who wanted to hurt him. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers were cramping, but I couldn't let go. If I did, I might fall apart. I forced myself to take a deep breath, even though my chest was so tight it barely filled my lungs. Jake, I said slowly, making sure he heard every word. You need to tell me exactly what's going on. Who are these people? What do they think you did? He ran a hand over his face, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. I owed them money, and I was trying to get it back. I had a plan, but it backfired. They think I stole from them. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Did you? His head snapped up, eyes flashing. No, Mom, I swear. I was desperate, but I'm not stupid. I wouldn't steal from guys like that. He looked down again, his voice dropping. But someone set me up, and now they want their money, plus interest. A lot of interest. I swallowed hard. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out a way out of this. How much? I finally asked. He hesitated, and that pause told me everything. Jake, how much? His jaw clenched. 15,000. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. I had savings, but not that much. And even if I did, giving it to some low-life criminals wouldn't fix anything. They'd see Jake as an easy target and keep coming back. Okay, I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my brain was screaming. We'll figure this out, but first, you're coming home. You're not staying here another night. He shook his head. I can't. If they find me at your place, they'll use you to get to me. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Jake, have they threatened me? His silence was my answer. I couldn't breathe. I had been terrified for him, but now I was part of this nightmare. We have to go to the police, I said, but he grabbed my arm. No, Mom, you don't get it. These guys have cops in their pockets. If I go to the wrong one, I'm screwed. We're screwed. His voice was frantic, desperate, and I knew he wasn't just being paranoid. He had seen something I hadn't. He knew how deep this ran. Then what do we do? I whispered. He exhaled shakily. There's one guy who can help me. He's the one who got me into this world, but he also has a way out. If I can just get to him, I can fix this. My stomach twisted. I didn't trust anyone in whatever world Jake had gotten himself into, but I also knew we were out of options. Where is he? Jake hesitated. He's not local. We'd have to drive a few hours. My hands tightened on the wheel. Then let's go. His head snapped toward me. Wait, you're coming? I shot him a look. You think I'm letting you go alone? I just found you, Jake. I'm not losing you again. He exhaled, a mix of relief and guilt. Okay, he murmured. Okay. I put the car in drive, glancing at my son, my scared, reckless, stubborn son. I didn't know what we were walking into, but one thing was certain. I wasn't letting him face it alone. The drive felt endless, the silence between us thick with unspoken fears. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, but I couldn't let myself panic. Jake sat next to me, staring out the window, his leg bouncing restlessly. I could feel the tension rolling off him. Finally, I had to break the silence. Who is this guy we're going to see? He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. His name's Leo. He used to be, I don't know, a fixer, I guess. Someone who could make problems disappear, for a price. But he got out of the game a while back. He's the only one I know who's smart enough to find out who set me up and maybe, just maybe, get them off my back. I nodded slowly, trying to process this. And why would he help you? Jake hesitated. Because I helped him once, a while ago. He owes me. I didn't like the sound of that. The way Jake said it, the weight in his voice, told me it wasn't something small. I didn't push, not yet. I had a feeling I wouldn't like the answer. The road stretched out before us, dark and empty. I had told myself this was just a drive, just a way to help my son out of a bad situation. But the deeper we got into it, the more it felt like I was crossing into a world I wasn't meant to be in. After a few hours, Jake directed me off the highway, down a winding road that led to a small, run-down house on the edge of nowhere. The place looked abandoned, but the dim glow of a single light inside told me otherwise. I parked, my heart pounding. Stay here, Jake said, reaching for the door handle. Absolutely not, I shot back. I didn't drive all this way to sit in the car while you walk into some sketchy situation alone. He sighed but didn't argue. Together, we approached the house. Jake knocked 3 times, a specific rhythm, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. Leo was nothing like I expected. Older, maybe mid-50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He studied Jake, then flicked his gaze to me. Didn't know you were bringing your mom, he said, amused. Jake didn't smile. She's the only reason I'm still alive right now. That wiped the smirk off Leo's face. He stepped aside, letting us in. The place smelled of old books, cigarette smoke, and something metallic. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, to drag Jake back to the car and never look back. But I stood my ground. Leo sat down, motioning for us to do the same. So, you finally screwed up bad enough to come crawling to me, he said. Tell me what happened, Jake explained, his voice tight. And I watched Leo's expression shift from amusement to something else. Something calculating. When Jake finished, Leo leaned back. Yeah, I heard about that mess. Word on the street is you stole from Victor. My stomach turned to ice at the name. Even I had heard of Victor, a dangerous man with a reputation for making problems disappear permanently. Jake clenched his jaw. I didn't steal anything. Leo shrugged. Doesn't matter. Perception is reality in that world, kid. And right now, the reality is that Victor thinks you owe him, which means you do, whether it's fair or not. I gritted my teeth. So how do we fix this? Leo studied me, then Jake. I might have a way, he said slowly. But it's gonna cost you. Jake sat up straighter. How much? Leo smirked. Not money, a favor. I didn't like the sound of that one bit. Jake hesitated, then nodded. What do you need? Leo's smile widened. I'll let you know when the time comes. Every nerve in my body screamed that this was a bad deal, but I also knew we didn't have a choice. Jake was trapped, and I'd do anything to get him out. Leo stood. Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't over. Not even close. and I had the sickening feeling that whatever was coming next was going to be even worse. The night dragged on, thick with tension. Sleep was impossible. I lay on the creaky couch Leo had offered, my mind racing. Jake was out cold in the chair across from me, his head tilted at an awkward angle, exhaustion finally winning over stress. I envied that. My body was tired, but my brain refused to shut off. Every decision I had made over the past 24 hours had led me here, sitting in the dim glow of a single flickering lamp, in the house of a man who could just as easily save my son as he could betray him. Leo had disappeared into another room after his cryptic, "We'll talk in the morning," and I had no idea if that meant he was figuring things out or if he was letting us stew. I hated this feeling, this helplessness, this waiting. I was a mother. I was supposed to be the one fixing things, solving problems, making sure my son was safe. And yet, here I was, stuck in a world I didn't belong to, completely out of my depth. A noise pulled me from my thoughts, a soft creak just outside. My stomach twisted. I sat up, straining to listen. Another creak, footsteps. Someone was outside. My pulse hammered. Slowly I reached for my bag on the floor. I didn't have a weapon, but I had my car keys. If nothing else, I could hit the panic button, make some noise. I rose, moving carefully toward the door. The porch light was off, but through the thin curtains, I saw the faint outline of a shadow. Someone was standing just outside. I turned, ready to wake Jake, but before I could, the door handle twisted. My breath caught. The lock held, but barely. Whoever was out there wasn't knocking. They were testing the door. My mind raced. Leo had locked it, right? He wouldn't have just left us here unsecured, knowing the danger we were in. I reached for Jake's arm, shaking him awake as quietly as I could. His eyes snapped open, his body instantly tense. "Someone's outside," I mouthed. His expression darkened, and in a flash, he was on his feet. The door rattled again. Jake grabbed a nearby lamp, the closest thing to a weapon in reach. I took a shaky breath, heart hammering. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move. Then, a low voice came from outside. "Jake!" I felt the blood drain from my face. Jake went rigid. Whoever was out there knew his name. "Who is it?" I whispered. He didn't answer, just clenched his jaw. The voice came again, calm, almost amused. "Come on, man. We both know you can't hide forever." I had never felt fear like this. It wasn't just the threat of danger. It was the way Jake looked, the way his face went blank, like he already knew exactly how this was going to play out. And it wasn't good. I swallowed hard, fighting the panic rising in my chest. The man outside knocked this time, slow, deliberate. "Open up, or I open it for you." Jake exhaled sharply, setting the lamp down. "Stay here," he murmured. I grabbed his arm. "Are you insane?" He pulled away, his expression unreadable. "I got this." Before I could stop him, he unlocked the door and opened it just enough to step outside, slipping through the gap before I could follow. The door shut behind him, leaving me frozen in place. I rushed to the window, peering out. A man stood in the shadows, tall, broad, wearing a dark jacket. His posture was relaxed, but something about him radiated danger. Jake stood in front of him, tense but controlled. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw the way the man tilted his head, like he was amused, like Jake was some kid caught in a lie. Then, without warning, the man reached out and grabbed Jake's shirt, yanking him close. My breath caught. Jake didn't fight back. He just stood there, jaw clenched, as the man said something low and sharp. Then he let go, shoving Jake back. Jake stumbled but caught himself. The man smirked, said one last thing, then turned and walked off into the night, disappearing into the darkness as if he had never been there. The second the man was gone, I bolted for the door, throwing it open. "Jake!" He was still standing there, staring after the man, fists clenched at his sides. He didn't turn to look at me. "We need to leave," he said, voice tight. I grabbed his arm, forcing him to face me. "Who was that?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "That was Victor." Everything inside me turned to ice. The man Jake was running from, the one he supposedly owed, had just been standing right outside that door. And he had let Jake go. Jake didn't say anything for a long while. His gaze was distant, unfocused, like he was seeing something in the distance that I couldn't. The weight of his silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My heart was pounding in my ears as I waited for him to speak, to give me some kind of explanation. But instead, he just stood there, his face still a mask of uncertainty and hidden thoughts. "What do you mean, Victor?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. My mind was racing with a million possibilities, none of them good. Victor. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine. But it wasn't just the name. It was the way Jake had said it, like it wasn't the first time he'd dealt with this person. Like Victor wasn't just some random guy, but someone who had a hold on Jake, someone who had power over him. Jake finally turned his gaze back to me, his eyes dark and guarded. "He's the one I've been running from," he said quietly. "The reason I came here. I thought I could outrun him, you know? Get away from the mess I made." I stepped closer, feeling my stomach twist into knots. "What mess, Jake? What are you not telling me?" Jake closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was trying to shut out the reality of what he was about to say. "Victor's not just some thug. He's deep in things, bad things, things I didn't even realize when I first got involved. He's got people, connections, and once you're in, it's hard to get out." I could feel my breath hitching. This wasn't the kind of situation I could fix. It wasn't the kind of thing I could control. I had always believed that, no matter what happened, as long as I was there, I could protect Jake. But now it felt like we were both caught in something way over our heads, something we might not be able to get out of. "But why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of frustration and hurt. "Why didn't you come to me? I could have helped." Jake's jaw tightened. "I couldn't. I didn't want you to be dragged into this. I thought I could handle it on my own. But Victor doesn't let you just walk away. He'll come for anyone close to me. And I knew, if you found out, he'd find you too." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing the depth of the situation we were in. This wasn't just about a bad decision or a mistake. This was about survival. I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him towards the house. "We need to go, right now. We can't stay here. Leo, he's not safe either." Jake didn't resist as I pulled him along, but I could feel the tension radiating off him. His eyes darted nervously around, like he was still waiting for Victor or someone else to show up. I couldn't blame him. I was scared too. As we reached the door, I turned to Jake one last time. "We need to make a plan, something. I'm not losing you to this. We're going to figure this out." Jake's gaze softened just for a second, and then he nodded. "I know, but we have to be careful. One wrong move, and Victor's got us both." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. We couldn't let fear control us, but it was hard not to when everything we thought we knew was falling apart around us. And as we stepped back into the dim house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. We huddled in the dimly lit living room, the walls closing in as the silence between us grew heavier. Jake's breath was shallow, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, like he was still bracing for something to happen. I tried to steady my own breathing, but the unease was spreading, clawing at my chest. "You know, it wasn't just Victor that was the problem," Jake finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if the walls were listening. "I got caught up in all of this because I thought I could control it. I thought I could handle things on my own." I watched him, trying to read his face, the lines of guilt and regret etched deep into his features. "I get it," I said quietly, my heart aching for him. "But you're not alone anymore. You don't have to handle this by yourself." He glanced up at me, his eyes softer than they'd been earlier. For a moment, I could see the relief in them, like he finally understood that he wasn't carrying this weight alone anymore. But the reality of the situation came rushing back. We had a long way to go before we'd be safe. "Victor is dangerous," Jake continued. "I thought I could outrun him, but it's not that simple. He'll stop at nothing to get what he wants. And now that he knows where I am, he's not going to let it go." I could feel my stomach tighten as the truth of his words sank in. There was no way to escape this, no easy solution. We were tangled in something far too deep, and it was only going to get worse before it got better. "So what now?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do we do?" Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing his face. "We stay low for now. We lay low and wait for the right moment. I know it's not much of a plan, but we don't have many options. We need to find out more about what Victor's doing, who's involved, and then we can figure out how to get out of this without him coming for us." I nodded, my hands trembling as I reached for his. This was bigger than anything we'd ever faced before, but if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that we would face it together. "I'm not leaving you," I said, my voice steady. "We'll get through this." Jake squeezed my hand, the corners of his mouth lifting in the smallest of smiles. "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what I'd do without you." And for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that counted for more than anything. As we sat there, waiting for the storm that was surely coming, I knew one thing. No matter what happened, I would fight for Jake. We'd face whatever Victor threw at us together, and we would come out the other side stronger.